Well, welcome formally to the University of Chicago Leadership and Society Initiative virtual information session. We are thrilled to have you here. We have a 5-part agenda. We're going to share a welcome where we introduce the speakers. We're going to give you a snapshot of the Leadership and Society Initiative. We're going to go through the learning journey in more depth. We're going to talk about the highly selective process for fellowship candidacy, and then we will answer your questions. With that, let's start off by introducing who's here. Steve, can I ask you to go first and share who you are?
Sure. Thanks, Seth, and welcome everyone. So I'll just give you a brief background as to who I am and why I'm in the LSI program. So I retired mid-year last year from a 40-year career in investments, where my last role was leading a private markets business for a large global insurance company. But the way I think about myself is that my story really started as a child of Irish immigrants, growing up in a working class family in New York City. And my family really valued education and work. I was very fortunate to be able to go to the college. I was admitted to the college at UC, where I graduated with a degree in economics. And more importantly, I met my wife here, and she's also a child of immigrant parents, and she's of Italian descent. And so as we progressed through our careers and had our family, we really never lost sight of what was really important to us and what was instilled in us by our parents, which was the importance of work and education. And I really knew that I wanted to pursue some initiatives to help youth from underserved communities. And a number of years ago, I started looking at programs like LSI to really help me make that transition from a corporate career to one in social impact. And I would say that LSI has really allowed me to take what I would say is the off-ramp from my professional career and help me to explore my initiative and really give me what I would say is the on-ramp to my next chapter. I thought, like, coming into LSI, as I looked at other programs and specifically LSI, that I would really benefit from the structured environment that the program has, really benefit from working in a cohort, and then really be able to benefit from the tremendous resources that the university has to provide. And I think we're exactly halfway through the program at this point. And I'd say that I came in with incredibly high hopes, and at this point, it really has, my hopes have been surpassed. It's just been a great first half of the program, and really looking forward to the second half.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that wonderful introduction. And it's a perfect segue because you mentioned how amazing the program has been. There is no greater reason than our director of the Leadership and Society Initiative, Diana Petty. And Diana, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Seth, and thank you, Steve, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's really wonderful to see so many faces on the screen. We can debate on the merits of me being the cause of this wonderful first year. Of course, the University of Chicago is a plate of dissenting points of view, but I appreciate it very much. And Steve, it's been so wonderful to be even a small part of your journey. So I do have the joy of being the director of the Leadership and Society Initiative. I've been at the University of Chicago for just over 6 years, but I come to it, and the lion's share of my career I actually spent in and around city government. So I worked in the Bloomberg administration for about a decade, doing civic tech initiatives and public-private partnership building. And while I was in New York, I was very fortunate to be a part of a few different leadership development programs, and one in particular out of the NYU Wagner School for Public Policy that was really aimed at supporting young professionals who wanted to do social impact work, who wanted to make the world a better place, crystallize their unique talents, their strengths, and really discern a path to optimizing the impact that they could have in the communities that they were already serving. And so I got really interested in that time about the role that higher ed can play in activating leadership capabilities and talents, and really a leadership force for the betterment of the world. Of course, most of my experience was working with people who are at the very beginning of their professional journey. So when I heard about this opportunity to get to, have an extraordinary privilege to work with leaders who really have operated at the highest scales and are at quite the peak of their wisdom, I jumped at it. And so I get to pinch myself every day to be a part of this. And it really animates me and energizes me each and every step of my own journey in this. So looking forward to sharing more and grateful for your time with us.
Well, and I'll just add, I'm Seth Green. I'm the dean here at the University of Chicago Graham School. The University of Chicago Leadership and Society Initiative is a collaborative effort of 12 schools and divisions. So it's every unit of our university that is a partner. We, though, have the joy of being the home of the initiative and to have team leaders like Diana that are really moving the needle. I'll just share, while our school is about the lifelong liberal arts and leadership, my own background mirrors in some ways a lot of the themes in LSI. I started my career at McKinsey & Company and have a business strategy background, then came over to the social impact world. And I've counseled over the last 2 decades about 150 executives on this transition. And so as I joined the university and we were working on this initiative, I was so excited that we could be the home, because this is something that I think is really important in our society. And with that, let me tell you a little bit about LSI, and then I'm going to come back to Diana and Steve for their insights. So if you're here, you probably know that LSI supports distinguished leaders, people with more than 2 decades of senior leadership experience in designing meaningful next chapters, both for your own wellness and purpose, and even more important to the university, to activate your talents for society. There's a 2-part premise, and you're here because you're living it. So I'm guessing you're familiar. The first is people are living longer. Now, I want to acknowledge in our country, we've actually seen some recession of this issue in the last few years. But among people that have a certain education and certain experience level, the group that we're targeting with LSI, the age has continued to elongate. And so if you reach 60 today, there's a very high likelihood, if you're in this group, that you will reach 90 based on all of the data available. What that means is that people are opening up a new chapter of life. And what's happening, according to all the data, is that because of the dynamism of our economy, people are actually finishing their longstanding careers slightly earlier. So if you put those 2 things together, there's another 15 or 20 years, another chapter of life that has opened, especially for the target population of LSI. There's a second premise, though, that is equally important, and that's issues in the world are more complex than ever. If you think about, and I know there are different issues that may animate you, but democracy, climate change, inequity, how we build a society of respect, all of these issues are very intertwined. They have elements that involve large systems, social media, technology, policy. And what we know is that leaders that are coming out of this senior level experience have a deep understanding of how to move ideas at scale in efficient ways. And what we wanted to do was figure out, in a world where there is a massive demographic change, and we actually are building less young people, and we have more people that are aging up, how do we activate the talent that has these capabilities to move the needle on really important issues in the world? And so that is the 2-part, or you might say circular why behind LSI, that we want to support individuals in really discerning a meaningful next chapter. And there's a lot of data to suggest that purpose is actually the most important ingredient in health at this stage of life. You can feel like you're losing overnight when you finish your career, your identity, your purpose, and your community. And this aims to really make sure that individuals have those pieces, and we'll talk about how. And for us, we're really excited about, we have ideas at the university. They are breakthrough in terms of how they could positively impact society, but we need people. We need individuals who want to use those ideas to make that difference. And we're excited about creating an environment where these extraordinary executives can come to our campus, can take in these ideas, and can go out into the world and put them into action with their great talents. So that's why we're here. And one way to think about the why is the finale of your LSI fellowship year, that you are presenting when you finish your capstone, a purpose plan. And that purpose plan is your why, your mission, vision, and values, your what, so a really deep analysis of the issue that you might want to focus on, and your how, the specific roles, applications, and partnerships you intend to take on. And just to preview this, while there is variation in the cohort, most people are taking this as a portfolio life, and they're involved in a number of different domains at this stage in a different way than they may have been during their core primary career years, although some, a subset within the first cohort, are actually thinking that they may use this as a career switch, for example, from the private sector into a social impact sector. I'll just share that all of this is made possible by a cohort community. So we'll talk about the learning journey, but what we've heard, because we've been surveying this inaugural cohort, and Steve can probably tell you he feels like he is an experiment, given that we're in year one. What we've heard is that while our faculty are amazing, and while there are many value drivers of this experience, the overwhelming and most important value comes from the cohort itself. And so I just picture here the incredible people that make up that first cohort. But let me not tell you about this experience. Steve is living it, and Diana is very close as its director. And so, Steve, maybe I can start at the end and ask you about your purpose plan. And I acknowledge you're only halfway through the year, so it's not formally due yet, but I know you've been working on it. And I'm curious if you could just share kind of the 60-second version of your purpose plan vision, and maybe an aha moment so far that you've had as you've been developing it. And I'm going to take down the screen just so we can see you and Diana as we have this part of the conversation.
Sure. And for me, I'm part of a group of the cohort that came in, I think, with a fairly specific idea. And I may have come in with even, very specific, even relative to many of my peers in the cohort. But the idea that I came in with was that, and it ties back to how I described my background, is I wanted to improve summer youth employment opportunities for high school students. So that was very specific. And now that we're midway through the program, that's still a core element of what I'm looking at, but my vision has really taken on a broader context. And so it's now to help high school students build social capital through employment initiatives, and really to also help the adults who are working with those students to become trained about the importance of building social capital and be intentional in providing those resources to the youth that they are working with. So employment is still central to it, but it's taken on this broader context. And I think the biggest drivers of that shift for me has been working with a small learning group that we have within the cohort. We've broken into 5 groups of 4 each. And through that process, we meet every couple of weeks discussing my plan, their plans, but thinking about what I've been working on, challenging assumptions, and really refining what I thought the purpose of the summer youth employment was. And as we talked through it, time after time, there was actually an aha moment, which is it's not about the paycheck. It's really about the benefits that youth get from that, and how do you do that in the most effective manner. But I would also say that one of the LSI core classes that we took this quarter was on social structures. And the real benefit of that class to me, and maybe another aha moment, was that it really gave me the academic framework to understand what I was intuitively thinking. And the combination of those two have tremendously advanced to where I am in the thinking of what I want to do, once the program is completed. So it's been incredibly helpful for me.
Thank you, Steve. And Diana, I want to come to you to broaden the picture. Steve gave his example, which, as I hear it, is on I knew a bit of what I was going to do when I came in, and I further narrowed and optimized that idea. That is one piece of the fellows, but you see all the fellows. Can you just kind of round out the spectrum of how fellows are pursuing these purpose plans and the different ways in which they're thinking about this chapter of their lives?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I think by design within this cohort, we had sort of three categorical groups of people coming in. The first is what Seth and Steve is alluding to. You know, a subset of the group came in with quite a degree of clarity in terms of what they were looking to do. They had a lot of ideas. They had already put some irons in the fire and already started working through some possibilities and really wanted to use their time in LSI to put their hypotheses through its paces, pressure test it, and really come out with you know, a really strong concept that they could then turn into reality. On the opposite end of the continuum, we had another third of the group come in and say, I have 100 ideas, right? I'm at the very top of my funnel. I'm motivated, I'm dedicated. I think I have a lot to offer, and I want to give back. But I'm choosing between a very disparate groups of things that don't relate to each other because I have a lot of different interests, and I want to be in a space where I can tease those out, where I can start to, you know, diverge and converge, and move forward from there. And then the final third was somewhere kind of in between those two groups, I would say. But what has been striking, I would say, for me, that despite the variance in terms of how people came in, I think fairly cohesively across the group, you know, and largely through the peer-to-peer process and having the fellows really ideate with one another and ask probing questions and, you know, help people think about different, like as Steve was saying, different frameworks for getting at answers. All the fellows have progressed significantly from where they started on day one in the autumn to this halfway point that we're at now. I mean, you know, Steve can share more, but I've been struck. There's been another round of presentations of where people are at in their purpose plans and the level of precision and clarity and confidence from the start to where we are now. That's not to say that there aren't more questions to answers, more research to be done. Certainly the rest of the year, there's still a journey ahead. But it has been invigorating for me to see that evolution. And certainly, you know, it's worth being transparent and candid about the fact that some people had a bunch of ideas and they hit dead ends along the way, right? They came up against something, they were like, I looked into this and I have decided this is not right for me. And for us as a program, we see that as equally valuable to the process of discovery. And that is a very important part, you know, in the spirit of the scientific method, that is a part of helping learn, you know, how we get to the best answers and the best outcomes. So yeah, it's been terrific. And we're really excited to see what happens at the end of the year.
So we're going to talk about the learning journey in a moment, but we already have a question in the chat, Diana and Steve, about the composition of the cohort. And maybe, Diana, can you just describe how you approach the composition of the cohort? And then maybe Steve can come to you to see if it's working and, you know, if it has value in your experience. But Diana, you first.
Yeah, so I'll share that I think there's three things I see as unifying all fellows in LSI. The first is that they're at a demonstrable inflection point in their lives and career and are really looking for a space where they can think intentionally, systematically, about what the next stage could be. The second is that as part of that next stage, they have a real fire in their belly about social impact work. They're deeply dedicated and committed to translating their extraordinary leadership capabilities and expertise to moving the needle on pressing social, economic, and environmental needs. And the final, the word that just keeps coming up so consistently in this inaugural year of LSI is a sense of humility, that they're returning to this, you know, a learning environment, to an academic setting, truly to learn because they want to, and they're open, they're receptive. Again, they're motivated, they have some ideas, but they really want to absorb, and they're ready to acknowledge that they don't know what they don't know. And so they're walking into an experience like this. Beyond those three dimensions, I would say the cohort is diverse in every other scale. So we certainly have a great degree of career and sort of sectoral diversity. About 60% of the cohort comes out of private industry, so spaces like finance, such as Steve, law, real estate, media and advertising. We then have a kind of around 40% who come out of the civic sector, broadly defined. So we have folks who have done large scale nonprofit work, philanthropic and foundation work. We have one former elected official. We have a few former physicians, or one who's actually a practicing physician, and then several emeriti faculty who are thinking meaningfully about how they translate their scholarly expertise into more practical applications for social impact moving forward. So you can see there's a really wide range of career perspective. There's also a great degree of diversity in terms of region, gender, and lived experience. So, those are things we're continuing to hope to grow, particularly international representation in the cohort. We have one international fellow this year who is tremendous, and we think there's just nothing but opportunity to expand that representation as well. But Steve, tell us how it has been being in this cohort.
Yeah, no, it's been really fantastic. And as I mentioned, earlier on, it was really one of the main reasons why I wanted to be a part of the LSI program, is having the cohort structure. And Diana, as you mentioned, it is a really diverse group, and from lots of different dimensions. And where I, like to focus a lot on is diversity of thought. And there's, that there as well. There's a lot of different lived experiences, and, just different ways about thinking about the world, thinking about, the value of not-for-profits, and, the need for new not-for-profits, or where those needs may be. And so as a cohort, we spend a lot of time together. We're in classes probably about 9 or 10 hours a week together. We have weekly luncheon sessions. There's a bunch of, I mentioned the small group learning sessions. There's a bunch of informal get-togethers. And so through this process, both formal and informal, there's just been really an amazing sharing of information and ideas. And as I've thought about like my purpose plan, some of the best leads that I've gotten have been from my fellow fellows, in terms of saying, hey, I heard you talk about this. You may want to talk to this person. And the other thing that, like, for me, that's been really interesting, as the idea of social capital has sort of formed in my thinking, is it's a theme that runs through a lot of the different purpose plans for a lot of the fellows. But it's in different forms. But the fundamental thing of building social capital for whatever group that we're looking at has been an interesting theme, which has then created this other ability for us to communicate and, again, share ideas that may help. Like I'm looking at high school students. One of our fellows is looking at building social capital for college students. So we've been collaborating on how do you put these two together so that it's like this seamless transition. So it's just been very rewarding from that perspective.
Well, Steve and Anna, thank you for those comments. We're going to come back to you in a moment, but I want to walk everyone through the LSI learning journey and then hear about your experience in it, Steve, and your direction of it, Diana. I do want to say, as I enter this, that in addition to the diversity that Diana and Steve talked about, one other form I just want to name is I've been impressed to see the purpose plans range across the spheres of societal impact, in the nonprofit areas that Steve's talking about, all the way over to people that are thinking about for-profit businesses, but with different lenses of impact that they're adding into them at this stage so that they can achieve certain purposes. And who would the University of Chicago be if we didn't see, at least in some parts of the fellow group, capitalism as a form of opportunity to energize this next chapter? So I just share that because I'm actually reading some applications right now and noticing the wonderful diversity of thinking across the incoming prospective group of fellows as they think about how they might use capitalism, in the cases of a few, toward those positive ends. All right, let me tell you about the LSI learning journey. It's a 3-part journey that has been very intentionally crafted. And the first part is knowing oneself. And we'll talk more about what this looks like, but think across time and space, people have asked questions about why am I here and what's my legacy? We at the University of Chicago are big fans of core texts. We use those with people like David Brooks teaching to look deeply at who you are at this stage of life, what your values are, And as David often says, how you transition from career values to eulogy values, which are very rarely the same when you read someone's obituary. And your goal is hopefully to have a lot of time before you get to those values, but to start leading a life toward those now so that you can build that legacy. Part 2 is understanding the world. And this is, I think, the most UChicago of all elements of this program, because what we want to do is give you different lenses on the big issues of our time, intentionally bringing together perspectives that compete and disagree with each other. So you might be looking at crime and safety. And an economist who runs our crime lab might look at the data and say prosecution leads to lower crime. And a sociologist who happened to just win a MacArthur Genius Award, who is at our Crown Family School, might come in and say, look at these qualitative studies I've done and written a book about, where once we start putting people into jail, there's recidivism, and we start having this family vicious cycle. And we do not give you answers. Our view about how to think about the world at the University of Chicago is we help you in how to think. We give you an economic lens in this program. We give you a sociologist lens. We give you a policy lens. They may have very different viewpoints. Then you get to decide what you think based on all of these different lenses. And one thing that I think is so valuable, I mentioned I've counseled, a couple hundred people over the last 2 decades who are trying to make this transition that I made from being in private sector over to social impact, is that one of the things that happens in that transition in particular is that you interact with people that have very different lenses. And we believe here at the university that an economist lens is a really powerful lens. But if you want to move the needle, Steve's working on youth employment, you're going to end up working with people who may have been trained in other lenses. They may have a sociologist lens or a policy lens or an anthropologist lens. And it doesn't mean that you'll walk away from LSI believing those lenses necessarily. You may still come out and say, the economist lens is the one that resonates for me. But you're going to be able to partner and collaborate with people with other lenses so much better, because you're going to now have seen how they might look at these same issues. And so we look across issues, we look from different lenses, and our goal is to help you in how to think about the most important issues of your time. Final piece is envisioning the future. And this is where we bring in practitioners who are in the spaces where many people want to build their portfolio lives or their next careers. So we have the best leaders in thought and in practice on board leadership, both corporate board and nonprofit board. We have people that are working on the frontiers of strategic philanthropy and counseling family offices. And they teach courses that help you to think about how you build that purpose plan and the applications you may want to have in your next chapter. What that literally looks like in the actual curriculum is that each of these become a course. The first is frameworks for reflection, and you have both philosophical texts and practical texts. And we bring together faculty from across the university to be able to bring you both philosophy and practice. So as an example, on your left, you can see that in the autumn, that course actually had a Booth professor who looks at leadership and how people manage in a very practical way, and a classicist who was looking at how Marcus Aurelius and Taoism and other faiths and literature might approach leadership. And you come throughout all of these different disciplines to your own sense of which maybe you take, and then how you define your leadership. And you can see that same approach is weaved throughout. So in the interrogating systems, it happened to be in the autumn, we were looking deeply at capitalism. You had Robert Gertner, who's at Booth, who was presenting perspectives on capitalism, but with many that were pointing out its virtues. And then Kimberly K. Wong, who's written a sobering book and an absolutely riveting approach to how capitalism plays out globally, kind of pointing out many of the inadequacies and raising a lot of questions. I'll just share that the curriculum from a course perspective is just the beginning. In addition to the cohort-based curriculum, you get to audit 2 classes anywhere in the university, as long as they don't have prerequisites. And that allows you to go deep into areas that you may be interested in that you can then parlay into your purpose plan and that next chapter. There are immersion days each quarter where we take one issue and we not only bring the cohort together, but we bring experts and practitioners from around the world. And so next week, we actually have our winter immersion days on AI and society We have people that are coming from the Bay Area that are working on the frontiers of AI. We have ethicists from around the world who are coming in. And then we have a number of practitioners who are in the space who are going to learn alongside the fellows. We also have a yearly travel study this upcoming spring. That'll be in London, and we'll be looking at sustainable urbanism. Next year for this cohort, it'll be in Paris. It'll actually be looking at longevity. As many people know, they have a problem. It's a good problem to have. They're living much longer than other countries. And it's a problem because they're trying to figure out what that means for pensions. But again, it's a very positive problem in the scheme of things. And we want to learn about how other countries could adopt that problem of living longer and having that kind of longevity. And so we're already working right now on the spring trip to Paris next year for the 24-25 cohort. And then finally, we have a wonderful partnership with the Aspen Institute. They are a nonprofit that brings humanistic inquiry and ideas to life. And we work with them on a values, purpose, and leadership seminar that's part of the orientation activities for the fellows to really create that community around the shared sense of values. They've been doing it for nearly 75 years. And we thought rather than rebuild the wheel, we would invite them into this. And we've had a wonderful relationship, and we're very grateful for their continuing that work with us next year. That is the addition from a co-curricular side. We also have advisors who work with you on your purpose plan, and there are 3 of them. There's an executive coach that is helping you to activate the next chapter. So if you say, I want to be on a corporate board, they're helping you think about what does that corporate board bio look like? What do you include? What do you not? So they're really helping you, just like an executive coach would, in your career journey. They're helping you with your next chapter journey, since typically you're thinking beyond career, but you're still needing to present yourself and put yourself forward in a number of different contexts. We have an academic advisor. They are working with you on the idea in your purpose plan. So Steve would be working with someone to really investigate what is the root cause that I want to solve for through employment. As he talked about, in his case, he's coming around to social capital being a focal point, even if it's through the means of employment. And then finally, you have a distinguished mentor. That's someone that's actually done this before. I'm looking again at Steve. In his example, it's someone who actually has been involved in very strategic philanthropy at the highest level to move an entire field forward. And how he did that was very much incremental. He got involved, he started giving, and then over time, he decided, I want to be more and more strategic. And so I know he's been counseling Steve on kind of how to think about that as Steve kind of enters this potential terrain. And I want to say that we were very intentional. Steve did come in with clarity about what he wanted to do. So when we paired with the mentor, we made sure the person was going to be maybe 5 to 10 years ahead of Steve in doing something in a similar theme, so that he could really be relevant to the needs that Steve had as a mentee. So that all leads to the purpose plan that we talked about earlier, your roadmap of why, what, and how. And I just want to name that all of this can be done with your partner should they be interested in joining you. And the only piece that the partners do not have access to is the next chapter advisors, because they do not need to complete that purpose plan. With that, let me come back to the people that know this much better than myself, Steve and Diana. And Steve, I'd love to start with you and hear about your experience in this learning journey. And I want to start with the question of what it's like to be back in class. You mentioned in your case, although overwhelmingly the fellows are not alums of the university, but we're glad to have an alum back in our universe. But it had been about 40 years since you were in class. And I'm curious, what it was like to be back in class and kind of how your cohort and audited classes have been going so far.
Yeah, so it's funny. My wife went back to she got a master's degree, and then later in her career, she went back and got a doctoral degree in education. And I said, "You're crazy! Like, why are you going back to school? I'll never want to do that." And here I am. So the reality of it is I've always been a lifelong learner. I really cherished my time at the university, in the college, and really felt like incredibly, rigorous academic environment, which, I was looking for. But coming back, I was fairly nervous about, hey, do I have the chops to keep up with the rigor of the the program, and just being, you know, an older person on campus. And so the reality of it is, you know, neither of those have been a concern, and it's actually been really invigorating being back on campus. And my wife wasn't crazy for going back for her doctoral degree. I think for me, like, you know, to put some specificity on what I've gotten out of, you know, being back on campus is some of the audit classes that I've taken have really moved the needle for me in terms of thinking. You know, one was this crime prevention class, and Seth, you mentioned the head of the crime lab who runs it, you know, just a world-renowned person in terms of crime prevention, Jens Ludwig. Very, very helpful in thinking about youth and you know, some of the issues that they face, and again, having, you know, particular meaning to me in my initiative. Had a class on the meaning of work. This was another audit class with Amy Stanley, another world-renowned professor, and again, very meaningful to me in what I'm thinking. And so came away from both of those classes with, you know, different perspectives. When it comes down to the core classes, they've also been incredibly helpful. I mentioned the social structures class, which has really shaped what my vision is now. You mentioned the capitalism class. And so, like, I came into that class thinking, you know, I've been in investments for my entire career. Is this really going to be all that helpful? But the where we went in that class and really thinking about social inequality, and not throwing capitalism under the bus as like, you know, an evil, but really thinking about, you know, how has capitalism, you know, affected social inequality, and how do we, you know, from those learnings, where do we go with that? It's been incredibly helpful. We had a class on practical wisdom, and Seth, again, I think you mentioned humility, you know, just the concept of having humility and taking perspective, and particularly as I'm moving from a corporate career into a career, or, you know, a space, social impact, where I'm less knowledgeable about, is having those concepts be front and center for me, I think is going to be invaluable. And then there's been some other classes that we've taken in terms of being very specific about designing a social impact organization and community involved organizations that Michael Strautmanis taught, which both incredibly helpful in terms of advancing our thinking, and, you know, both for different reasons really valuable. But again, the community involved organization, hearing from practitioners saying, hey, I know you want to be helpful there, but you really have to listen to the community. You have to have your ears open, and don't think you're going to solve the problem. Really listen and be a partner with folks. Again, I think those will be invaluable as I make, you know, my shift into the social impact community.
Thank you, Steve. Diana, let me just come to you. As you look across kind of all the elements that are in this initiative, what do you see as some of the unique strengths of the experience for fellows so far?
Yeah, so I think we're learning, and this was a hypothesis, but, you know, I think we're really seeing it come true, is that there's a sweet spot in an experience like LSI of harmonizing a collective journey that is based on the cohort, that is, you know, really taking advantage of the transformation of peer-to-peer learning, while also having meaningful opportunities for fellows to um, you know, individualize what they're looking at and go deeper on things that really spark their passions and imagination. So, you know, as you've heard, the LSI core curriculum is really designed with the spirit of the liberal arts in mind. And in addition to helping, you know, progress on their purpose plans, what we hope that all fellows will leave their fellowship experience with is a very adaptable and dynamic toolkit, if you will, both for frameworks for reflection, but also frameworks for decision making. And that applies to oneself, right? You know, having meaningful new practices, new processes for reconnecting with your values, with where you feel purposefulness across the way you live, and also making choices about how you structure your life, the behaviors you adopt, the things that you prioritize in terms of using your time, but also apply those different types of lenses and tools in terms of your leadership for society. So as Steve was saying, you know, pulling in these different theories, these different vocabularies and, definitions from sociology, from economics, from policy, to both understand, the issue at hand, but also evaluating promising interventions and how your unique expertise and strengths and talents are uniquely aligned to fit in. Where are there gaps? Where are there opportunities for replication or scale that you might be able to bring a lot to and really enhance and augment? But then in addition, through the audit process, through the immersion days, those are moments to really go narrow and deep. And really, our fellows are able to wrap their arms around the issues that they're thinking about working on. And so I think that duality and that interplay between zooming way, way out through the core oftentimes and perspective taking from a variety of different points of view, and then able to sort of parlay that into going really deep, that seems to be a really powerful combination that the fellows seem to all be taking advantage of in different ways.
Well, Stephen, Diana, thank you. I'm going to come back to you when we get to Q&A. I'm just going to briefly touch on selection, and then we're going to come to your questions, which have been lighting up our chat. We should start just with the who, and you heard this a little bit, but we'll be very specific here. To apply for LSI, you should have 2 decades of senior leadership experience, a track record of significant accomplishment, a willingness to engage in deep, rigorous, and respectful open exchange. It's a hallmark of the University of Chicago. You will be presented with diverse viewpoints here, and even views that are controversial. We believe the best way to get to new knowledge and for people to internalize how to think is to actually be confronted by views that challenge them. And the cohort this year, I think, has been a role model in having those discussions with utter respect, while still bringing very divergent viewpoints so that everyone can then walk out of the room with new lenses on the world. You should have some proven commitment to society. And here I want to emphasize that looks very different. For the 40% that Diana mentioned that are coming from the social or public sector, it may have been their direct work. For others, it may be a way that they served on a committee at their work, or a nonprofit that they're a member of, or just a decision to give. And we know that many people are thinking about this stage of their lives as an opportunity to activate that goal that they may have had in their minds, but as CFO of a Fortune 100 company, their commitments made it very difficult for them to fully activate. And so we really do take seriously your ability to articulate that view, even if your experience may not be as deep as some others who are in the same application pool. And finally, we really want to use these slots to empower you toward a compelling next chapter. And while the goal of the year is to discern and activate that chapter, we do want to understand thematically what that vision is for how your participation could help you in your journey and could help society. So that is who we are looking for. It's important to note the process itself. Next week, the 16th, which is Friday, is the next deadline to submit your resume or professional biography. We tried to make the first step of this as simple as possible because we want to be respectful of your time. What that allows us to do is to review the fundamental eligibility criteria and to share back with you whether or not you are a promising candidate just based on those very initial details. Then, if you're invited, we ask you to complete a full application. That is more involved. That maybe is the UChicago application process, where you're being asked for a personal statement, for references, for some short essays. We really take this seriously. And the reason we take it so seriously is that we now know, although we expected this even before this year, the greatest value of this experience is the cohort. And so we see the selection process as actually fundamental to our ability to deliver the LSI experience. And so the reason for that is not because we want to put people through a lot of extra work. It's really because it really did help us this time to build a cohort composition that we believe has been transformational. And part of that experience obviously continues because we can see some of it on paper, but then having the opportunity to interview you and really hear from you, your vision. Finally, we should say, and you see this on the site, that this is a significant investment, not only of time, because you are in Chicago and these are in person for Monday to Wednesday of every week of the academic quarter. But importantly, it's also a significant financial investment. The cost this upcoming year is $77,500. That said, I want to be very clear that we offer very substantial financial assistance and scholarship. We are committed to having people from diverse lived experiences. And in the first cohort, that meant very significant investment, especially, although not exclusively, for people that were coming from the public or social sectors, so that we could have a cohort that really represented all of the different backgrounds. So with that, let me come now to questions, and I will stop sharing so that I can begin asking some of the questions that are in the chat. One of the first ones is just about logistics. And so, Diana, can you just describe the kind of timeline of the year? And then Steve, maybe we could talk to you a little bit about what it's like to be immersed and how you balance this against other activities, which is another question in the chat. Diana?
Yeah, so, in our development process for LSI, we heard consistently in our focus groups, in our surveying, that if we're going to support this level of leader, we need a degree of flexibility and freedom in mind, because they will have meaningful outside commitments that will be ongoing, while also balancing that with the in-person cohort and community building that, as Seth said, that's the number one most transformational learning that's going to happen. And so we didn't want to jeopardize that. So the way we landed is that the program runs for one academic year. So from September to June. And it is essentially 20 or so hours per week, but we isolate the in-person formal LSI programming from Monday to Wednesday. So that's when all the core classes occur. That's when the recurring weekly lunches occur. And we try to the greatest extent possible, have any specialty events occur Monday to Wednesday as well. So we've intentionally left Thursday and Friday to fellows' discretion for how they use that time. So for some, that does mean continuing their board service. Some people are still, kind of executive chairman level at their organizations. Others are running consultancies and have clients that they need to adhere to. And others just want to spend time with their grandchildren and their families, because that is a huge priority at this chapter of their lives. And so we've tried to, kind of have that adaptability, but it is worth saying that for those who have relocated, who really are living in residency in Hyde Park, those Thursday and Friday days are just ample additional opportunities to really be a part of the full livelihood of the university. So there's no shortage of other activities, symposiums, lectures, cultural events, and many of our fellows, I think, have found great meaning together in getting to experience some of those other dimensions of the university. So that's essentially the rough kind of working week over week structure of the program. But Steve, anything you might want to add about how that's looked for you?
Yeah, no, it's worked well. I think the structure of having the Monday through Wednesday, being on campus has been really important. I think the sort of the personal connections that we've been able to build by being together for 3 days a week has been really important, as I talked about before. But then having the flexibility on Thursdays and Fridays has also been really important. I'm living in Hyde Park now for the program, but I live in the Raleigh-Durham area. So I go home every couple of weeks, partially, most importantly to see my family, and my wife will come out here occasionally. So we split it up that way. But also, as I think about trying to build a not-for-profit in the Raleigh-Durham area, I want to be, present there as well. So I'll use that time to go back and meet with folks in the local community. So I think the split between 3 days on campus and the 2 days where you have flexibility is a good part of the structure and has worked well for me. It is a big time commitment, though. If you're not from the Chicago area, being away from your family for a big part of 9 months is a big time commitment. Is one of the things that I struggled with, whether to come into the program or not. But my wife's been incredibly supportive, and I know fellows partners have been incredibly supportive to them as well. So it's worked out.
And I'll just round out by saying that in the cohort, there is a range, and Steve's right in the middle of it. Some people have fully relocated to Chicago. I do want to acknowledge, though, there are people that are flying in Monday morning and headed out Wednesday night. And for them, it's 60 nights away because it's 3 10-week quarters and they're gone, Monday and Tuesday night. So the person who is doing that maybe gets a little bit less because there are sometimes things that we can't control. I mean, so Larry Hogan was on campus recently. I think that event took place on a Thursday because that's when he was here, and he did a special lunch just with the 18 fellows who could make it that day. And they talked to him for 2 hours about no labels, which is an interesting political endeavor that he was here to talk about. So, we do have a vast range of experience that we just want to emphasize. And we can make this fit for different circumstances, but know that the more you need to be away from campus, the more there are things that sometimes come up, even though we locate the overwhelming share of activity from Monday to Wednesday. There's another question in here just about how to think about the right time to do this. This person said that they're partially retired, currently serving as executive chairman. They still do have responsibilities. Is this the right time, or should they fully retire before pursuing this? And I'll acknowledge before turning it over to Dan and Steve that in the cohort, we also have variation here, that we do have a couple people that have taken a step back, but are actually still maintaining work, but at a part-time level. We actually have several that are executive chairmen during parts of this, although one of them rolled off in the middle of the fellowship from that role. And then we have people that are, at the full retirement from their career, even though they are not considering themselves retired because they're pursuing this next chapter very vigorously. So, I mean, Dan and Steve, anything to add to that in terms of, how to think about where you are? And I mean, Steve, maybe any discernments on your side about this as a participant?
Yeah, I think it's a very personal choice, and Seth, as you described, we have the full range, I think, within the cohort. For me, is I really wanted to put an end to the first chapter and commit myself to the second chapter. So that worked for me, but I'm seeing it work in many different ways for my fellow fellows.
Yeah, I think that that's our aspiration, is that the way LSI is designed can support leaders who are in transition, but what that transition looks like could be at a variety of different stages. But that the value comes, for fellows who come in and are like, I could do this on my own, right? I'm going through a transitional moment. I want to make some changes, but I'd really like to have the space and the community, because I think that will accelerate my process, right? Being able to do it. And we've heard again in our design process for LSI, when we talk, there are no shortage of extraordinary examples of leaders who made this type of leap from a very distinguished career into chapters of social impact. But when we talked with a lot of them, they were candid about the fact that they stubbed their toe a lot along the way, right? And it felt awkward and clumsy, and sometimes they were peer pressured into doing things that didn't feel like it aligned with their identity and their values at that stage. And so then they had to kind of rework. And the thought, and again, what we're designing for, is that by being able to do it in a methodological, in a focused way with a group of peers, can help really work out some of those kinks iteratively, and sort of land in a slightly more accelerated way with more confidence and clarity about what comes next for you.
Well, we are nearly at time. I'm going to take one more question from the chat. This person mentions that there are numerous initiatives, and they were curious what makes the University of Chicago Leadership and Society Initiative distinctive, is the word here. I mean, I'll share maybe just at a starting place, and then turn over, Diana and Steve, to you, that there are three values that animate everything at this university. We believe passionately in free expression and open exchange. We believe passionately in diverse viewpoints that allow that open exchange to matter and actually for you to leave the room with a new perspective on the world. And clearly, to get to diverse viewpoints, one element is diverse lived experiences. And then finally, we passionately believe in the power of humanistic inquiry. And so we have every discipline at this university, but at the end, it comes back to us. And we believe that many of those answers can be found by looking across time and space at texts and how other people have answered those questions. And so those three values infuse everything at the university, including certainly LSI. But Diana and Steve, parting shots on distinctiveness, and maybe we'll come to you first, Steve, and then give you the final word, Diana.
Sure. So for me, as you read the question, the two things that popped up to me were just the rigorous academic environment of the university. Again, I had experienced that at the college, but I think as you described, the humanistic inquiry, et cetera, that's really, I guess, what I think about from the academic rigor. It's not just reading the materials, it's really searching for answers in that and sharing ideas with your peers. And then the second thing, and it's more of an emotional thing, but the purpose plan. There may be other programs that have similar goals, but I think the way we talk about the purpose plan emotionally, that is very rewarding to me and really makes me strive to want to accomplish what I've set out to accomplish.
Dan, the final word.
So I was just kind of ruminating on this with another fellow last night. So I'll use my new 84 best friends as a focus group for this idea, which I think what makes LSI distinct is an experience of reflection with intention in mind. But what that intention is, very much in the spirit of the University of Chicago, we're not prescriptive about that, right? We really do embrace and encourage fellows to define that for themselves. So I'd say that, when I look at other programs, there's many programs that have a sort of focus on reflection and other programs that have a focus on action. They do those things extremely well. And, they have been wonderful collaborators. And I think we're very collegial in this space. And it's truly a gift. But the way we think about it at LSI is that we do have an action orientation, but we want our fellows to come at that in alignment with where they feel purposeful. And so they're going through this methodological process, this intellectual discovery, as Steve was mentioning, with that intention in mind, with the motivation to take action. But again, it's going to look so different for each individual, kind of based on where they land with connectivity to their own values. And I think that that's what really excites us and energizes us. That impact can look so different, but be no less substantial. And especially that we're equipping our fellows to do so with a high degree of purposefulness.
Well, Dan and Steve, thank you for your insights today. Thank you all for joining us. We are incredibly grateful in year 2 of this initiative with this cohort coming up to be with so many people seeking out information and engaging this possibility. We are ultimately aiming to change the structure of adulthood with this initiative and to see more people, whether through LSI or through many other possibilities, this next chapter of their lives is a purposeful one for themselves and for society. We look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you. If we didn't get to your question, we did capture them in the chat, and we will aim to reach out with an email to answer it directly. Have great afternoons, everyone.